and there are means in which we need to improve. And that, by the way, is going to be true for all of us. So just sit back and recognize that this is something that we all need and can work on. The adult Bible class, and I'm going to be thinking of this mainly today in the terms of an auditorium class, though the principles will apply, and I'll discuss briefly some other things and how the size of the class matters. But when you have this adult Bible class, that can be a challenging undertaking to be willing to stand up and to discuss something in this kind of atmosphere. Can we all agree on that? Does that just have a hint of fright comes over you when you think about that? Well, anytime you walk into an adult class, you are automatically presented with a variety of experiences. As you look over an auditorium, you see vast differences in background. A lot of differences in the knowledge level as you see different people. And sometimes you look and you see, I've got to find a way to help this person who just got out of college and this person who's been a Christian for 80 years. And my challenge is to reach both of them, to teach them both something in a way that they can take in, grow, and be what they ought to be. You are dealing with different educational levels in an adult Bible class. You are going to have people in some cases who may or may not have a GED, and you will at sometimes have people who have a doctorate degree. They will be in your class simultaneously, and your job is to find an illustration that they both can appreciate. Congratulations, you're in an adult Bible class. This is the challenge that we have. And it's our job to teach all of these people of all age ranges, of all backgrounds, of all levels of education, and to teach them all something that is worthwhile, that is meaningful, that is helpful, and above all spiritual, despite the fact that they are nowhere close to anyone together where on any of these levels. This is the challenge. And you know what it does for us as a people? It means when it comes to volunteers, everyone takes the position of, woo, not me. Let's sit on the hands. Somebody else can do that job. Or we get, well, isn't that what the preacher's for? Well, yes and no. We have some preachers here, and I want you to think about this for just a second. In our preaching schools, and you can throw in colleges too, if you go to some, and I was fortunate to go to one in which we had a class on homiletics, preaching, every term I was in school, a particular class. And that varies by school to school. How many classes, gentlemen, did you have on teaching? I had one. Now, as a preacher, I will tell you that after almost 25 years, I have taught more than I have preached. That's actually the nature of it most of the time, is that I am teaching oftentimes 3 classes a week versus 2 sermons. And so, why is it that we would devote all this time and attention to giving a lesson? And it's not that we shouldn't do that. That's one of the reasons we have that on our program today. But that we need to balance it and recognize that it is a very different skill to teach a class than to preach a sermon. These are different things. And I believe you who are not preachers intuitively know this. You know there's a difference between getting up and having a prepared statement, a prepared remarks, and a prepared text in which you give prepared lessons from it, and you extend a brief invitation from getting up and having a discussion with people in some cases about what the text says and what could possibly come. You know that intuitively that there's a big difference there. Right? So we have a challenge before us. So I'm so thankful that you are willing to be here today because this is you when someone just told you to teach the adult Bible class. What have I gotten myself into? It can be a very frightening experience. It can be a very frustrating experience. It can be very intimidating at first. And sometimes it can be all these 3 for a long time afterward. But it's still worthwhile. It is worth doing, and it is worth working on the skills so that you can do it. Because it is so important. It is important because I will maintain It is in your adult Bible study classes where you have the opportunity to grow that congregation spiritually more than anywhere else. It's the nature of a class. The nature of a sermon is a call to action. That's one of the things that makes it distinct from teaching. It is heralding the message with a call to let's get busy. But the problem is a lot of times is people are saying, let's get busy, and we don't know what we're supposed to be busy about because we haven't had a good Bible class. This is where our information, our knowledge of God's Word can be grown and matured, and we can still realize, oh, I need to do this. There needs to be part of that in class. But it is what we need to understand is this is what we're trying to accomplish, and see if we don't understand going in what our goal is, then how are we ever going to get that out of it? It doesn't just happen automatically. Oh, we had a Bible class. Yippee. So, what did you get out of the Bible class? What was the point of having the Bible class? So you have situations where you either can come together and you can share your ignorance, and I have seen that on multiple occasions, or you're coming together to grow your knowledge. Now, I'm going to go ahead and give you a couple of examples of this. Years ago, I was visiting a congregation far, far away. I want to specify that. And sat in on the Bible class in which I found out that there really was no good reason for the account of Samson to be found in the Bible. And the class, in their wisdom and their shared ignorance, all agreed on this one point as they studied about Samson. The irony escaped them. In the same class, a few months later, I returned, and we are studying, it may just have been a few weeks, and we are studying Ruth. Ruth. And yes, we are going to question the virtue of Ruth, who is stated to be a virtuous woman. Ignorance shared. But now let's take it to a different level, because you thought that was as bad as it gets. Oh no, my friends, we can do much worse in the church. I'm visiting another congregation, just throwing in or traveling on a Wednesday night. And here, what do we find? We are teaching everyone's favorite, the book of Revelation. Right, yes, sir. All right, so in our version of this class, as I sit and observe, we have the teacher who has his Bible open and he has his commentary open. The class consists of reading the text and then reading the commentary. Right, okay, well, in a pinch, we can understand some of that, and the Revelation is a very difficult book. You might want to have some kind of notes, and why not just take the best you got, right? Well, there were 3 other men in the congregation who were commenting during the class. And I, being a visitor, sitting kind of toward the back, was observing this. One person right in front of me, one person kind of over to the side to my left, and one up front, just enough where I could see over them in a slanted auditorium. Each one of these 3 men also had a commentary on their lap, and their comments were coming from the commentary. Now, if you know much about the book of Revelation, here is where it really gets interesting. They are all 4 different commentaries. Oh, well, okay. That's not it. They are all 4 completely different approaches to teaching the book of Revelation. When you understand the book of Revelation, you've got one that is a preterist view, one's a continuing history view, one's an historical background view, and one is a point of view about a thematic view, and they're all trying to make sense of this together in a Bible class. That is mass confusion of which all the people in the class, except me and my wife, were apparently unaware. Now, I don't say that all to embarrass them or to embarrass you. I'm saying it shows we have work to do when it comes to our Bible classes and teaching them. So, when we think about what it takes in order to do this kind of work, we need to recognize that navigating an adult Bible class is more than art. It's art than science. It's not something where I can just give you these simple rules, follow them, and hey, everything's cut and dried, let's go. It's art to it. But here's the thing, it takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there in a class. Adult Bible class, you are with people that you're pretty sure at some point know as much or more than you do on certain things. And you're accepting that challenge as you go in to take the class. And to do so and to teach on God's behalf with the humility to recognize that you don't have all the answers. And by the way, that is a key to getting up and being willing to teach. If you are someone who thinks, well, I've got to get up and know I have all the answers, you are the least qualified person to teach, because you have to be willing to admit that you can learn something from your class while you are teaching the class, and that there are going to be questions that they might put at you that the answer is, I don't know. And you have to be there if you're really going to be qualified to teach an adult Bible class. So don't be ashamed that you don't have all the answers. Recognize that's right. That is exactly where we are. And maintaining this kind of idea of being willing to put yourself out there on God's behalf and having the humility to recognize you don't have answers, keeping those together is essential to be successful through the process of teaching. You need both of them. But realize this is a process. It's not, I'm going to churn something out, it's complete, it's perfect, and hooray, we can move on. It is going to be an ongoing process for as long as you live, as long as you're in that congregation and you're teaching that class. But in reality, I would suggest it's not just one process. And that's what we're going to be looking at in the remainder of our time. It's a number of interrelated processes that are required to think through as you're thinking about doing this class to make it work. And it all begins with an important term, and that is preparation. If you're going to have a successful Bible class and be able to get through it, you must prepare properly. Now, I'm going to be referring you to a number of scriptures. We don't have time to cover that because I'd be talking all day. But I'm going to give you some examples of this, each one of the importance of preparation and our other points within Scripture to show you that every single technique or item we're discussing was to some way true in the life of Jesus, as well as some other examples. In Luke chapter 2, verses 46 through 52, Jesus is at a young age now, but what's important here is he is participating in a class at 12 that was designed, you really see, for adults. He's with the rabbis answering questions, asking questions, involved in this. He's preparing. It's clear he's been taught. It's clear he's been studying. This is the pattern for Jesus throughout his life. He is always prepared and working on understanding what he needs to do in order to teach as he then taught, as we see recorded in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But I think if we turn over to 1 Timothy chapter 4, 12 through 16, we're going to find, really, I'm going to give you just out of that text 4 principles of proper preparation. And again, we will have to move quickly. The first thing as a teacher, though, you need to prepare is yourself. That is your life. And that's verse 12 of 1 Timothy 4. You got to get your life right. Why? Because any good study you've done and any good lesson that you've learned that you are trying to explain is going to be completely lost on someone that knows you don't live it. You got that? If you're not living it, you can't possibly teach it effectively. That doesn't mean you have to be sinless. It means you need to realize the responsibility of your visibility, and this goes back to James 3 and verse 1 also, that you're going to be judged for this. But as you are going forward, you are to model first the lesson as much as you are to present the lesson. Okay, so we've got to make sure we recognize that and live it. And that means then, once you've recognized that the life needs to be there and you take responsibility for that, you also need to take the responsibility seriously of teaching itself. That's verses 13 and 14, where he tells Timothy, hey, you need to prepare, get you busy. Get busy with what you need to do on what you've been given and get working on it. In other words, this whole process we think, and one of the problems is how we train men. And I use the term train very loosely here because, first time I was ever taught a Bible class at all, I was a senior in high school. I was a senior in high school, and the amount of direction I was given was, we want you to teach the junior high class. Great. Oh, okay. What? Oh, it doesn't matter, whatever. There's a winner. Okay, so what do? I teach, I go to Genesis. We're going to teach some things about apologetics and the beginnings, and we do that. And learned a lot in that process. But I didn't know a thing about preparation. And for a lot of us, the nature of preparation is, it doesn't matter, here's your handbook. That's somebody else's preparation. Your preparation is what you bring to the table in conjunction with any handbook or book that you have. That's your preparation. When I talk about preparation, it has to do with what you're willing to bring to the table in addition to any material that you have at your disposal. So what Timothy was being told to do in his preparation, remember, he had been given miraculous gifts, and in that context was told to be using them, but he was also told that he had a responsibility in how he went about it. So we need to recognize that while we have the information at our disposal, it's not something that we just then approach lightly, but rather we need to get into it and prepare to say, this has something to say to everyone here, to me, and I need to make sure I'm seriously considering what this job is all about. That then takes us to what he says in verse 15, and that is study meaningfully. Study meaningfully. If you're teaching a class, all of a sudden you can't just kind of poke around and say, here's something nice. You need to actually have a focus of here's what I'm trying to understand and I want to get across. I need a focus, I need a purpose, and I need to study with that in mind. Now, our first purpose is if we're studying the text, in most adult Bible classes, that's what you normally are going to be doing. That's the most appropriate. Doesn't mean you don't teach topics. I've done that too. But most of the time we're going to be teaching the text, and we ought to spend time then in the process of Bible study. Now, again, you talk about a whole series. There's a whole series there. But you have to spend your time going through that text or that topic so thoroughly because you've got to be ready. You see, the key is, and we already recognize that there are going to be some people that know more than you do. Your job is to be so prepared that for that moment, you are more prepared than anybody else there. You can still be that. You can still be the most prepared person on that text if you want to be. And that's how we need to approach it, rather than, oh, I just don't have all this knowledge available to me. Well, then get busy. Okay, that's an excuse. Get busy learning and developing. Ultimately, you'll be that person that everyone else is scared to get up and teach in front of. All right? So let's make sure we're studying appropriate to that. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. Give diligence, effort, interest, activity to show yourself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And the last thing in verse 16 he goes into is you persevere diligently. You persevere in this. If you're going to prepare, it's one of those things where you come to the text and all of a sudden, it's really nice. Oh, it's rolling. Oh, I got this. Oh, that's great. What does this mean? And inevitably, you're going to get those, if you're really thinking seriously about it, you're going to roll across those passages that you're scratching your head. Okay, just this week, and for a very different reason, I was going across a text that I'll be discussing, probably in the next couple of weeks. And, okay, I'm coming up with conclusions on my own because I wait to the end. I do my own study first. Here's what it has to be in context. Here are my reasons. Now, if it's a difficult text, I want to make sure on this. Let me go check some commentaries just to see. I went and looked into all these commentaries. Well, the first thing that was a clue was none of them agree with me. None of them. Uh-oh. So what do you do then? Well, normally you say, I need to call somebody, maybe help me out on this. So I called my dad, preacher for 50 years. I explained my problem, told him what I thought. He said, you're exactly right. Perfect. But what was good was not you're exactly right. It was the discussion in which the ideas congealed in a way to where it made sense and that where I could give an explanation of where the places in the commentaries couldn't be right. Don't just turn to a commentary and say, well, that doesn't agree with me, and so I'll do it on my own. And don't immediately say, because I don't agree with the commentary, I must be wrong. You need to think about it. That's part of this process. The preparation means you're engaging the brain. If you haven't engaged the brain when you are studying for it, there's no way you can engage everyone else's when you're teaching it. Everyone got that? That's what you got to get. Okay, we've got to move on. Second thing we've got to do in this, if we're going to be really successful, is we got to provoke interest. Now, that can be easy and that can be hard. One thing is, I'm taking it for granted that you are here today because you are, to some degree, interested in learning how to teach better. It could be you're here because your wife drug you here. I have to also consider that possibility. But it doesn't matter. Either way, I have to be willing to do something to provoke your interest, to find a way to say, okay, you may not automatically be interested in this, but I'm going to find a way to make it interesting to you. That's the challenge, right? Sometimes, if you don't believe me, take something that you know something about, right? I'll take you, for example, and I'm going to take you down and say you're a sports fan. Pick your favorite sport if you're a sports fan. I don't care if it's hunting and fishing. I don't care if it's football, basketball, any level. Something you really enjoy. And I'm going to take you down to the Purple Turnip. That's our local frou-frou restaurant where they serve quiche. Sit in front of a group of women, and you get to explain why your sport matters. Have fun. Right? But the thing is there's always that person there in a Bible class. They're there, but they're not there. And we need to find ways to provoke their interest. Ways to do this, some recommendations then. Number one, do not answer everything yourself. Now, in this instance, I am lecturing, I'll tell you, I am lecturing because of the time constraints, not because that's how I typically teach. In a normal class, I don't want to answer everything myself. Matter of fact, I joke with the class, and that's another thing I recommend. But I joke with the class that I always answer I'll ask an easy question, answer it, and then give them the hard one. Makes for a lot more fun class, right? Y'all know some of these from home know. That's what I do. Okay, now, don't answer everything. Why? You make statements. You can do this even if you're lecturing. Make statements that require active learning. When I talk about provoking interest, I mean you're trying to get the person to stop being passive in the process. Oh, I'm just sitting here. Oh, yeah, I'm listening. Got it. Yeah, go on, preacher. No, that's not really what you're going for. You're wanting a mind that says, what's going on here? What'd he just say? Really? Now I've got, wait, no, that can't be right. Wait a minute. You think through it. Why? You're trying to engage the brain by provoking interest. John 3, verse 3, what does Jesus do when he first comes up and Nicodemus is talking to him? You have to be born of water and the Spirit. What? What does that even mean? You see? Nicodemus' first question is not a doctrinal question. He's trying to figure out what Jesus was talking about. It was a provocative statement that required Nicodemus to engage in a conversation that was pertinent to him. The statement was on point, it mattered, it was focused, and it brought Nicodemus in to the conversation he needed to be part of. That's what you're trying to do when you teach a Bible class. In Luke chapter 6, and because I've been going through Luke, I thought it'd be easiest for me, that is, to use this as somewhat a point of reference for some things with Jesus. In Luke chapter 6, this is the account of a sermon. We call it the Sermon on the Plain. But the same thing as Matthew chapter 5, Sermon on the Mount. What does he begin with? These statements that we call Beatitudes. Blessed are you poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Boy, you poor people have got it great. Excuse me? You see, that's a provocative statement. What is that? How can that even be true? But it draws people in because you provoked them to think. Another thing Jesus regularly did, we'll come on down to verse 24 and following, you challenge popular opinion and traditional thought when required. Go ahead and do it. In verse 24, but woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. In this day and time and period, it was assumed that the wealthier you are, the more blessed you were, the more righteous you were. He hits that head on and says, nope. What you believe, totally wrong. Wait a minute. What do you mean that's wrong? Now remember, it's not going to be offensive so much because he's talking mostly to people who are poor. But they accepted that. They accepted it. And so he has challenged them. You come down to verses 27, 28, loving your enemies. That's a challenging. That's what? That's not what they'd ever heard before. You go down to chapter 20 in Luke, verses 46 and 47. Beware of the scribes. What? These are your high scholars. And what he's saying, you better watch out for those guys. See, he's challenging that popular opinion and tradition. And what does it do? What does it automatically do? It perks up the ears. Now, I'm not telling you to go out there just intentionally and try to say something that's outlandish. That's not what he was doing either. He was saying something that itself was true, but that was not typically recognized as true. He was saying things that were challenging that previously had not been introduced as a challenge. And that is what we should be doing in provoking interest in our classes. Also then, thirdly, point to the spiritual, where the material tends to dominate. In chapter 21 of Luke, everyone else they're watching, and the scene is all these people coming and giving gifts at the temple, and says that many gave great gifts. And then you have the woman, the widow, who gives and comes forward, she gives 2 mites. Jesus, when they're focused on just an item of what everyone else would have been looking at, and that's what you're supposed to see in this scene, is everyone watching, it's oohing and awing. Wow, ooh, did you see what he gave? And Jesus says, did you see what she gave? She gave everything. That provokes interest. It is contrary to typical thought because it is concentrated on the spiritual part of what she gave rather than the physical. And every class you teach in a Bible class ought to have that as an element in it. Provoke interest. Fourthly, encourage questions by provocative statements. In verses 5 through 7 of Luke chapter 21, what do we find is Jesus is going through and they're marveling at the temple. All right. So he's going to and he just says, you know, all this is going to be destroyed, right? Well, they knew that. They actually did know that. But he forced them, by saying that, to ask a question, which was the same question that Daniel had asked in Daniel chapter 12 that he was told he couldn't get the answer to. And they want to know, will you give us the answer? Do we get the answer now? Why? Now he's got their interest. How do you do it? By stating something in a provocative way and encouraging a question as a result. Have you ever thought about this? Well, what about, if you can get people going, what about, you got them. Ask those kind of things. Provoke, poke, and inspire. Bring in background information that provides insight. This is number 5. Bring in background information that provides insight and helps people see the meaning of the text for themselves. Now we pick up with Jesus' answer in Luke 21, which begins in verse 8 and really goes all the way, well, I've got down 28, but it really goes down further than that to verse 33. He's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, what we just got through studying, we're still actually in this passage, so we'll be studying this tomorrow. But when we go through this, I'm looking at it as both, here's what it says, here's the context in which it was said. Where were they? Jesus was actually, they were walking out in this original discussion. They were walking out of the temple as the disciples make the remark. He makes his comment, they ask the question, and they are walking. They're all walking about as he is going and having this discussion. They're walking out of Jerusalem, out of the temple, out of Jerusalem, unto the Mount of Olives. That's what is going on here, because that's where he would usually spend time in the evening. So this whole conversation is taking place where they're walking. But you do that, and he's talking about what's going to happen. Well, when you go back and you go ahead and do the research into the destruction of Jerusalem, available firsthand or by Josephus, but you can get a number of shortened versions on this as well. But to get into some of the details about why this mattered, and the key is, and we'll get into this more in provoking interest, is take the people right here, pull them up, and transport them into the world of the Bible. Live it. Live it where they're having to live it, and now, because they're alive in it, they have to start seeing things and be more interested in it. There are some aspects of the Bible, just for a second, if you were to write your autobiography, what would you do? Like, what? Who'd want to read my autobiography? Be kind of dull. Well, good, this is exciting, so why don't you get into this one? All right? Hey, your life's not that exciting. This is a great life. All right, so let's get into it and realize there's something here that's worth our attention, and so try to provoke interest when you're teaching. Okay. Another means of doing this, and this is key in good teaching, is ask good questions. Good questions, not just questions, but the right questions. 5 things also on this. Ask questions to get people thinking. See that? We're just rolling this together. Why? To get that active learning going on. And by the way, this is even if they are silent. Just because people are not talking does not mean you cannot provoke active learning. A lot of times the people that aren't comfortable talking, you can still engage them to where they're thinking about what you're saying if you are asking the right kind of questions and doing things the right way. So what do? What kind of questions are we talking about? Well, it would include everything from all your typical reporter questions, they'll say. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. We tend to spend a lot of attention on who and what, though. You know, I used to joke around that we got to where there are answers people give in the Bible, they're already ready to go in a Bible class. God, Jesus, the Bible. God, Jesus, the Bible. You know, it's kind of our cheer. God, Jesus, the Bible. We got that down. And so we're going around and everyone's got that answer. And the other way, how do you get people to comment? You quote a verse and leave something out so people can fill it in. Okay? If you're doing that, that's fine, but you need to understand that you're still deadlining here in terms of the interest and getting thought going on. They're not actually having to engage the brain to do that. That's programming. You're wanting to really challenge. What do we do on this? Ask questions to point out what people should know but do not know. Now now you have to have studied. You have to have studied enough to be able to bring out some things that they should know but do not know. Now, here's the thing. You first have to make sure they're comfortable enough with you so you know you're not there trying to embarrass them. That's not the point of this. The point of asking this kind of question is not to embarrass anyone. It is, in matter of fact, it is fine, and I regularly will acknowledge, I don't expect you to know the answer to this. Right? I think everyone at Granbury Street understands I will do that. But you see, you have to ask the question to get the mind going to think about, well, that's a good question. Why does that even matter? See, you've got to engage in it. In John 3, verse 10, we're back now to Jesus' discussion with Nicodemus. But notice what happens in verse 10. Nicodemus answered and said to him, how can these things be? Verse 9, and Jesus answered and said to him, are you the teacher of Israel and do not know these things? What was he doing to him? I haven't told you anything that should be such of a surprise. He was asking things in order to provoke and saying things in order to provoke that kind of idea, what's going on here. Matthew 6, 8 through 11. What does Jesus start with? Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? Then he comes down and says, who do you say that I am? So it's a challenge. It's moving in a little bit closer and closer. In Matthew 19, 4 and 5, on the question of marriage, when he would ask a question, he said, have you not read? You ought to already know the answer to this. See, so he's using those kind of questions. Also, ask questions to establish what people already know is good. When he told the disciples, who do you say that I am? And Peter then responds, it's fine to ask questions that they will have the answer to, but it's important if you're asking that, if that information needs to be placed out on the table. See, ask the question and let someone else contribute to get the information out there that now we can discuss this. And someone else has put it out there, so now I get to talk about it more. Thanks. That's great. That's an interactive class. That's provocative and asking good questions. Ask questions, number 4, that push people to think about the actual words of the text and their implications. You go back to Luke again, in Luke 20, and I think about verses 41 through 44. Jesus, and this is in that series in which Jesus has just been asked a series of questions, and that's how it's organized, by the way, rhetorically by Luke. Series of questions that the different people have asked him. You got the scribes, the Pharisees asked a question, then they sent the Herodians to ask a question, then the Sadducees come in. It's just questions. Then they all give up, saying that we can't stump the teacher on this one. And then Jesus asks the question. Why do they say that the Messiah is the son of David? Because when David calls him Lord, and then he quotes from Psalm 110:1. Now, you go back and say, the Lord said to my Lord, sit thou at my right hand till I make thine enemies thy footstool. There's a quotation, he concludes it. Okay, answer me this. Why would you say that that the Messiah is going to be the son of David if David calls him Lord? Why would you do that? What was he doing? He was asking them a question about the text of Scripture to force them to have to think about the ramifications and conclusions that are required from that text. That is, there's more to the Messiah than just being a descendant of David. That was this point that he was getting to. But he didn't come out and say it. He just asked the question. He was forcing them to have to think about it. Also then, we turn to Matthew 17. Ask questions that anticipate students' questions. Now, this you have to know your students a little bit to be able to do, but I'll tell you it can be fun. When they had come to Capernaum, verse 24, those who received the temple tax came to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the temple tax?" And he said, "Yes." When he had come into the house, Jesus anticipated him, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth take customs or taxes, from their sons or from the strangers?" Now, how did he anticipate them? Was that a natural thing that he saw what was going on, or did he know that by some inspired means? It doesn't matter. On our basis of being able to anticipate, we can look around and realize there's something going on, and to anticipate, this was a natural question that someone would have. You anticipate that question. As a matter of fact, good preparation involves anticipating the questions you will get from the text in that circumstance or the topic. That's part of it, is trying to anticipate those questions. How much time do I have?
10 minutes.
Okay. Next, interact. Notice how all of these are meshing together. I said it was one process, but several processes. Interact. Luke chapter 10, 25 through 37, you don't have to turn there, but we're talking about the Good Samaritan. The instance when Jesus is asked about, who is my neighbor, man trying to justify himself, Jesus tells about the Good Samaritan. Well, the whole principle throughout this, we'll refer to a couple of other texts as well, but you ask questions for interaction, not just effect. That is, now we've moved on from the nature of the provoking interest and asking questions to understanding why you're doing it, is you're trying to get an interaction, even if it's only going on up here. You want people interacting with the material, but if you can, it will be better for everyone if you can get some of the class interacting with you. Don't ever think you're going to get everybody. It's just not going to happen. Not everyone's comfortable with that. Some people don't like to talk. They just rather just sit and listen. Some people, because they're introverts, don't like this large setting, is sitting there and participating any more than you might perhaps like being in the setting and teaching in it. So they are uncomfortable in that way. But if you can get just a few, and I maintain it only takes a few, people who will interact with you and be willing to put themselves out there, that makes for a much better class because it is helping to remove the pulpit as a barrier. It is one of the reasons we're down here today is because this is talking about teaching. And we want to get the feel that it's far more interactive and that it's okay, and except for it would drive Larry crazy, I could get up and move around everywhere. And, we could do that. Why? Because it gives us a more personal touch. And personal interaction provides that. Usually it's been said, and I don't know the studies exactly, but that if one person if you are thinking that question, it's likely that probably 10% of the people there have that same question you have. That's a generic kind of thing that's been thrown around a while. But in my experience, that tends to be about right. Is that I'm glad someone came. I'm glad he asked that question. I was wondering that too. So the people who will speak up, as long as you recognize what they're doing and know the people, so you know what they are bringing to the table. Because different people are going to bring something different to the table when you teach a class. Some people are going to have greater knowledge that they're going to be able to offer. Some people have experience that you can call on even to bring up an experience. Some people are great at bringing up a question and moving on. And some people are just great at keeping you going and giving you a reason to interact and saying, hey, this is great. We're getting along well, and we can joke along. Okay? There are different running jokes that we have in my Bible classes. All right? That they are all part of interaction. Now, some of them are about how there are certain people that are always looking for the answers to my question in the verses that are ahead that we have not yet covered. Okay? So that's one thing we'll do all the time, and my reaction to that is, we're not there yet. And it just becomes an automatic thing everyone comes to expect me to say. They know I'm going to do that. We're getting there. Hold on. Or sometimes it's nice segue. But you're recognizing it. You're interacting with them. Now, if you have, the closer you are to people, I've got two people here that interact. We interacted a lot in Bible class. So I'm going to use them as examples since they're here. Okay, Pat and I and Vince and I are very good friends, have been for years. So, and they've both been in my Bible classes a lot. Well, Pat, with our background, it's one of those things, we were sitting at a table one time after ladies' class, and we are talking about textual criticism. Everyone's favorite, right? Textual criticism. How many people know what I just said, what I meant? That's what I figured, yeah. Okay, so we're talking about textual criticism, a little bit of higher criticism too, I believe. And we were talking this, and we were just tuning there. It was after ladies' class. Several ladies were there. We were out to eat. And we were just enjoying our conversation, going back and forth. And after we were getting ready to leave, and one of the ladies comes up and says, I've been listening to you two for the last 10 minutes, and I have no idea what you just said. Okay, so that's kind of where we are on stuff. So I know certain things that I can count on, that there may be a topic that is far more difficult, but I know Pat has the background where I can interact with him on it and therefore help everyone else learn about it, because we can have this discussion, still keep it at the right level, but because it's a discussion, people are more apt to be able to interact and think it through than just my giving this explanation, which I sometimes have to do if Pat's not here. Vince and I, on the other hand, we are the, I'm not sure if it's Laurel and Hardy, what the comedy duo is that properly describes us, but in, what now? Dumb and Dumber, yes, thank you. And so, this is what it's like in one of my classes, everyone. I can count on people to every once in a while throw something out, and you know what? It's good because I'm not up here. I have the study and the purpose, but you know what? People need to know that they can be that comfortable. That's part of this. That's part of what encourages interaction. And so sometimes people aren't sure about me and Vince the way we'll go at one another. If they didn't know us, they might think we're mad, and we're having a great time. Okay? Because he'll be giving something to me or jabbing me on something, and so we'll be having that discussion. What is it doing? As long as it doesn't take over the class, as long as it's just kind of an aside to break up, okay, give people a break from the thought, you've let people now relax, now let's go again. And that actually helps in a more intense kind of class atmosphere, which I actually enjoy, is to really get the learning going. So what do you need to do? You follow up with elaboration on a question. In interaction, you have the question, but you need to have follow-up. Follow-up is where people learn, not the original question. Okay, you need that follow-up thing so that, notice when Jesus came back, when Nicodemus is asking, wait a minute, what are you talking about? He came up and elaborated on what he was talking about. So he started off with something challenging, but then the elaboration and asking another question and giving them thinking again, it was all part of that. You follow up with one question with another question that forces the student to arrive at the conclusion themselves. Matthew 21, 23 through 25. Watching Jesus in these times in which there's this disagreement and they're trying to challenge him on this, by what authority do you do these things? Well, I will ask you a question. If you answer me, I'll answer your question. The baptism of John was a heaven for men. Legitimate question, right? So we're asking questions, but his question, they wanted just a straightforward answer. He asked a question that forced them to come to a conclusion. They were uncomfortable with the conclusion, though. That's a lot of times what happens in a Bible study. But guess what? How are people going to say it? You didn't tell them just the answer. And by the way, people will remember answers they concluded for themselves rather than that they were told. That's why you ask these things and you're provoking the interest and having this kind of interaction. You follow up fact and information questions with purpose and application questions. Okay? It's not just who, what, when, and where. It's also why and how. Recently, I had an opportunity to teach for a day. Pat brought me in at Brown Trail to teach on hermeneutics. And those guys may never be the same. Because every time I'd ask them a question about some doctrinal question, they'd give the right answer, and then I'd say, why? And I challenged them on whether or not they were actually correct about their conclusion. And after a while, and how is that true? How are you going to apply that? And they're on these basic things. Well, now we're having to get down in nuts and bolts and say, oh, this is real. We can't just take things for granted. Now we have to learn it, pull it in, and what are we trying to do? We're trying to dig deep into God's Word so we have real faith. Not, that's what I always heard type of faith, which isn't faith, but this is what God says, and I know it and have concluded it from what I've been studying and challenged to consider type of faith. Those are very different. The type of class you have will make a difference there. Interact with students' answers with questions that require them to explain and justify their answers. That's what I was doing. Why? Because you're teaching them to be prepared for Judgment Day, not to be prepared for a pop quiz. That's why. And that ought to inform everything we do in a Bible class. Interact personally, and then we're going to close. That means, and I've already talked about this, relax. Right? Don't be afraid to illustrate some things physically if it requires it. Okay? Getting down on a knee is one of the hardest things for me to do with my knees. But sometimes try to illustrate something. It's a lot easier for me to be the crippled person. I got that one down. Right? I can do cripple pretty well. But you illustrate it, relax, be personable, even joke around with those you know, right? Let your personality come through, but make sure that it is always a focus on what God says and what people are there to learn. You are not there to entertain. You are there to teach. All this is about method and means, and we're going to pick up this afternoon as we continue to discuss what we can do in an adult Bible class. Appreciate your attention.